Alright, we're back! Welcome to part 2 of my rewrite of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, or as I call it, Quantumania. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, or it's been a while and you have more important things to remember than the ramblings of a YouTuber, I wouldn't blame you. I recommend watching it again. That way, it'll be fresh in your memory for part 2. But hey, maybe you're watching this on the bus or something and you don't have time to watch the previous video. Never fear, I am here to provide you with context. Skip to this point in the video if you don't need the recap. So, Scott and Hope face off against Whirlwind. After defeating him, Scott gets a call from Cassie, telling him to come home and that she wants to show him something. Scott invites Hope to come with him, and the two head off to Scott's house. When they get to the house, Hope notices that some of Cassie's hair is mysteriously turned blonde, but they don't give it much thought. Scott and Hope meet up with Hank and Janet in the living room, and Cassie takes them all down to the basement, where she reveals that she'd been trying to rescue Scott when he was trapped in the quantum realm. She shows the suit she made to go into the quantum realm, and she reveals that she stitched the pin particles into the fabric by hand. Hank starts to lose it, saying that they have no idea what could happen now that there are pin particles in Cassie's system, but they realize that the pin particles are what started to turn Cassie's hair blonde. Cassie also shows them a quantum beacon that she made to locate Scott, but it malfunctions, sucking Scott, Hope, and Cassie into the quantum realm. Just as a reminder, this rewrite is split into 4 parts, separated by their acts. Act 1, the opening, Act 2A, the quest, Act 2B, the build-up, and Act 3, the finale. Act 2 is split in half, separated by the midpoint for maximum tension. So, are you ready for some questing? Because I am. Now, enough dilly-dallying. Let's get on with part 2 of this rewrite. Scott, Hope, and Cassie fall into the quantum realm and crash onto the ground. Scott is the first one to get up. "It did not look like this the last time I was here," he breathes. Hope and Cassie stand up. "Hey, Cassie," Hope says. "Is it just me, or has more of your hair turned blonde?" Scott looks at Cassie's hair, and sure enough, the blonde hair that was previously only at the tips has spread upwards, now reaching about neck height. "Yeah, you're right," Scott says. "Wait, hold on, you don't have a helmet on!" "Oh my god," Hope cries. "Cassie, how are you alive right now?" Cassie shrugs. "I don't know. Maybe it was those quantum powers that Grandpa Hank was talking about." "Whatever it was," Scott says, "I'm glad you're okay." Suddenly, a large bug-like thing flies above the 3 of them. Scott leads Hope and Cassie under a giant mushroom, hoping that the bug creature didn't notice them. "I didn't know there was life down here," Hope exclaims. "Did you?" Scott shakes his head. "I don't think I've ever gone this far down." "Where are we?" Cassie asks. "I'm pretty sure we're in the quantum realm," Scott answers. Really, really far down." Cassie opens her mouth, ready to ask a billion questions, but she stops herself. She looks at the costume and mask still in her hands. "You know what? I'm gonna change into this. I'll feel safer in a costume." Cassie walks to the other side of the mushroom to change into her costume. Scott briefly peeks out from under the mushroom to look for any more flying creatures. He sees none and drags Hope out. "Hope, what do we do?" Scott asks. "Maybe we could grow out, like you did after your fight with Yellow Jacket?" Hope suggests. Scott shakes his head. "I don't think that's an option. I barely managed to grow to normal size that time. Actually, I'm still unsure if I lost an inch or 2. Scott tries measuring himself against Hope, but she pushes his arm away. "You were saying?" Hope says. "Right, I was only just able to come back, and we're much smaller now than I was then. But even if we could grow out, Cassie can't, and I'm not leaving Cassie. Not again." "What are you guys talking about?" Cassie walks over to Scott and Hope, wearing her costume. Scott sees Cassie, and his jaw falls open. "Dad?" Cassie asks. "Is something wrong?" "What? No," Scott replies. "It's just that you look so grown up." Scott sighs. "Cassie, I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you during those 5 years." "Dad, it's not your fault," Cassie says. "And besides, when we get out of here, we'll be able to make up for that lost time." Scott smiles. "Is mint chocolate chip ice cream still your favorite?" "Like there could be something better than mint chocolate chip." Scott and Cassie laugh. Then, from the corner of his eye, Scott sees a large bear-like creature lumbering towards them. Towards Cassie. Scott's smile vanishes. He looks at Hope's face and sees that she noticed the creature too. "Cassie," Scott says as calmly as he can, "turn around slowly, and don't make any sudden moves." Cassie does what Scott said and turns around, where she comes face to face with the giant bear-like creature mere inches away from her. Cassie sees the creature and screams. And she shrinks. Cassie suddenly shrinking startles the bear thing, which sends it into a rage. "Cassie!" Scott cries. "Cassie, where are you?" Zoom in to see Cassie, the size of an ant, hyperventilating on the floor. Hope flies into the air and shoots the bear thing with her sting blast. Scott shrinks down and punches the creature, pushing it back. While Scott's tiny, he manages to spot Cassie on the floor. "Hope, keep this thing busy," Scott says. "I'm going to get Cassie." Hope nods and continues to shoot the bear thing as Scott shrinks down and finds Cassie. Cassie, there you are! Scott runs to hug his daughter. Dad? Cassie cries. What happened? I saw the monster, and then everything looked weird, and what's going on? I don't know, but we're going to be fine, Scott says. I just need you to calm down. We'll get out of this. Okay. Cassie stands up and tries steadying her breathing. All of a sudden, she grows to normal size again. Seeing that Cassie is okay, Scott also returns to normal, and he and Hope manage to kill the creature. As soon as the bear thing is defeated, Scott whirls around on Cassie. What the hell just happened? I don't know, Cassie replies. You don't have a suit on. How did you do that? I don't know. Guys, calm down, Hope says. This is probably a side effect of Cassie absorbing the Pym particles. We just need to be careful from now on. Hey, if I knew I'd have to go through all this crazy crap, I wouldn't have stolen the Pym particles in by hand, Cassie says defensively. I'm not mad at you, Cassie, Scott reassures her. I'm just worried. Nobody's ever had Pym particles inside them before, so we have no idea what changes are gonna happen. Speaking of changes, Hope notices, even more of Cassie's hair is blonde. Sure enough, when Scott looks, about half of Cassie's hair is now blonde like her mother. Scott chuckles. You know what? You do look pretty good as a blonde. Cassie smiles. Suddenly, a spear lands on the ground inches away from Cassie. Scott and Hope whirl around, getting into fighting positions. From the distance, 3 people emerge. A woman, a man, and someone whose head appears to be made out of goo. The woman begins speaking, but everything she's saying is unintelligible. I can't understand you, Scott says warily. Who are you? The woman sighs and gestures to the goo man. Goo man takes a glob of goo from his head and loads it into a hole in his palm. He then fires a glob of goo at Cassie, and it flies straight into her mouth. For whatever reason, Cassie swallows the goo. When the woman speaks to Cassie, she nods and turns to Scott. Dad, you have to eat the goo. What? I'm not eating some strange goo, Scott says. Especially if it comes out of someone's head. Goo man lowers his head, embarrassed. Dad, don't hurt the goo man's feelings. Just eat the goo. I'm not eating the goo, Scott insists. What if it's poisonous? Well, I ate the goo and I'm fine, Cassie rebuts. Scott wages a mental war with himself before reluctantly removing his helmet and allowing Goo Man to fire some goo into his mouth. Scott manages to swallow the goo, and the woman begins talking again. Can you understand me now? She says. Yeah, I can, Scott replies. He turns to Cassie. Why didn't you tell me that the goo makes me understand her? She told me not to, Cassie says. She said it would be funnier that way. Oh, ha ha, Scott says. Hope takes off her helmet, and the Goo Man shoots goo into her mouth. Scott then turns back to the woman. What do you want? My name is Princess Marie Onette, the woman says, and what I want to know is whether you're a friend or a foe. This character is my stand-in for Gentora. She can still be played by Katie O'Brien. She did a great job. Scott raises a confused eyebrow. Your name is Marionette? What's that mean? Goo Man asks. Oh, a marionette is... It's like a little wooden figure you put on strings, like a puppet. In a flash, the princess charges at Scott and puts her sword against his throat. Do you really think me a puppet in my own kingdom? She demands. No, Scott says. You are very capable and very deadly, and please God get that away from me. The princess scoffs and sheaths her blade. Smart choice. Scott clears his throat awkwardly. Hi. My name is Scott. This is my wife Hope, and my daughter Cassie. We kinda got lost in here, and... Hold on, the princess says. You're from the macro. The what? The world up there, the princess explains. I believe you call it Earth. Oh, yes, Scott says. We're from Earth. Wait, does that mean we're not on Earth? Cassie asks. The princess shakes her head. Our realm is separate from yours. Time and space do not work the same here as they do in the macro. Like how Dad was trapped here for 5 years, but it only felt like 5 hours, Cassie realizes. The princess turns to Scott. You've been here before? Not exactly, Scott clarifies. I've never been this far down, and right now, we're trying to get home. The princess nods. I see. Come with me. I know someone who may be able to help you. Princess Mari walks away, and Goo Man and the other guy follow her. Scott, Hope, and Cassie share a glance before following them. Cue the traveling montage music. Okay, that's enough. Eventually, the group reaches a large metropolitan city. Welcome to Homeworld, the princess announces. She leads everyone to the center of Homeworld, and along the way, Scott sees a bunch of wacky-looking creatures. Maybe we can even put a Veb cameo in there for all of you who are upset I left them out. Anyways, Princess Mari reaches the center building, a large castle. She beckons Scott, Hope, and Cassie to follow, while Goo Man and the other guys stay back. They're not allowed in. Princess Mari brings the group to a large room and shouts, Father, are you here? Just a second, another voice shouts back. The princess turns back to Scott, Hope, and Cassie. I'd like to introduce my father, Kang. Adopted father, Kang clarifies as he enters the room. Mari's biological father was killed by her brother in an attempt to seize the throne. After he was imprisoned, Mari didn't feel right taking up the mantle of queen, so she handed the crown to me. Now Mari, would you mind telling me who these people are and why they're here? They're from the Macro Father, Princess Mari explains. I thought that you could maybe help them get home. This is Scott, his daughter Cassie, and his wife Hope. When the princess introduces Hope, Kang's eyes widen momentarily, but he quickly conceals the expression. Well, am I correct in assuming that Scott is the leader of your group? It takes Scott a second to realize that Kang is talking about him. Wait, me? I don't know if I'm the leader. Yes, Scott's the leader, Hope says. Thank you, Hope, Kang says. In that case, Mari, could you show Hope and Cassie to a guest room? I'd like to have a talk with Scott. Cassie moves in front of Scott. I'm staying with my father, she says. Whatever you want to say to Scott, you can say to us as well, Hope adds. Kang sighs. Very well. Mari dear, we won't be needing those guest rooms. Princess Mari nods. Alright, father. Mari turns to leave. Then, Kang snaps his fingers, and everything freezes in place. Scott, who remains unfrozen, looks around. What just happened? Kang walks up to Scott. Scott, I know you are dilated. Scott frowns. I don't know what you're talking about. You've been trapped in time before. I can tell via your temporal signature. Scott shakes his head. Sorry, I don't get all this sciencey mumbo-jumbo. If you want to talk about time stuff, Hope is much more knowledgeable. I'm sure that, during your time in stasis, you missed many moments with Cassie. Scott tenses, silent. Kang turns around and points a finger at Cassie, still frozen in time. With a flick of his finger, Kang de-ages Cassie back to her 10-year-old self, like we saw in Ant-Man and the Wasp. This is probably what Cassie looked like the last time you saw her before getting stuck in time, Kang says. You missed so many big moments in her life. Her first crush. He flicks his finger again, and Cassie ages to about 12. Her elementary school graduation. Once again, he flicks his finger, and Cassie ages a couple years to 14. Her first kiss. Kang flicks his finger a final time, and Cassie returns to her present age. But I can give you all those moments back, Scott. You could have been with your daughter through it all. Scott manages to get the words out of his mouth and says, You seem like the kind of guy who'd want something in return. Kang smiles. You're astute, Scott. Allow me to tell you a story. Kang begins to walk around the room. I come from Earth, just like you. But the way I ended up here was via exile. I was cast out by my variants. And when they banished me here, they destroyed my means of returning home, so I've spent decades trapped in this microscopic world. But then, the strangest thing occurred. Someone else from Earth made their way down here. I wasn't sure how, but I was not about to take it for granted. Together, we managed to fix the device that allowed me to return home. I was finally going to leave this quantum realm. So, why didn't you? Scott asks. That is the tragic ending to this tale, Kang continues. My new friend, who helped me rebuild the device, decided that they wanted to remain here, so they compromised the device. And that, Scott, is where you come in. You can reclaim the device that can allow all of us to go home. Will you help me get what I want most in the world? And in return, I shall do the same for you? Scott looks at Cassie, frozen in time. In his mind, he sees the 10-year-old Cassie, crying for him after he was lost in the quantum realm. I'll do it, he decides. Wonderful, Kang says. And also, let's keep this between us, alright? As long as you get your family home safe, that's what matters, right? No need to tell them the details. Scott nods. Kang smiles and snaps his fingers, unfreezing time. I feel weird, Cassie says. She looks over at where Scott is now, then back to where he was standing before Kang froze time. How'd you move so fast? It doesn't matter, Scott says, but I talked with Kang, and he says he knows how to get us home. Hope gets straight to the point. Alright, she says. What's the plan? Cut to Kang leading Scott, Hope, and Cassie to a large computer room. In front of one of the monitors is what appears to be a square human with small arms and legs. I'd like to introduce you to MODOK, Kang says. MODOK turns around. It's a pleasure to meet you, he yells as he sees Scott. Darren? Scott cries. It's the bee guy, Cassie breathes. She hides behind Scott. I see, Kang says. You're the Scott he keeps complaining about. MODOK then spots Cassie behind Scott. Cassie, is that you? Look how big you've gotten! Cassie whimpers and hugs her father, because if you were nearly killed by a man in a hornet suit with lasers as a 6-year-old, you'd probably still be afraid of him even years later. Scott hugs Cassie back, then turns to MODOK. How are you still alive? Well, after you destroyed my suit and left me to die, I fell into the quantum realm. Kang found me and rescued me. He gave me a new body and an even better suit than the one I had.
MODOK now serves as my head scientist,
Kang finishes.
a mechanized organism designed only for knowledge.
But his name is Darren, Scott says. MODOK snarls. Darren is dead! I'm MODOK now! Kang puts a hand on Scott's shoulder and directs him toward the large window that takes up an entire wall of the computer room.
Focus on the reason you're here, Scott.
Kang gestures out the window and points to a large pit in the ground.
You'll have to go through there to find the device.
What does it look like? Scott asks. Kang smiles.
You'll know it when you see it.
Scott looks at the pit again, when suddenly a blast of energy narrowly misses him, creating a smoking dent in the floor. Scott whirls around and sees MODOK seething at him with a laser gun sticking out of his chair. Damn it, Kang! MODOK yells. I know you redirected that shot! MODOK readies his gun again, but this time, I won't miss. What happened to only for knowledge? Scott shouts. MODOK laughs maniacally. Prepare to die, Scott! Suddenly, MODOK flies into the wall behind him and gets knocked out. Scott turns and sees Kang with his hand outstretched.
I apologize for MODOK, Kang says. He's a bit unstable.
Scott scoffs. Huh, I could have told you that. Kang points back to the pit where his device is.
I believe it's time for you to get going.
Can Hope come with me? Scott asks. Kang nods. What about me? Cassie asks. Scott shakes his head. Cassie, we have no idea what's down there. For your own safety, stay here. Cassie pouts, but nods. She walks toward the other side of the room, as far away from MODOK, who is now waking up, as possible.
You're awake, Kang says. Get to work on monitoring the area, would you?
MODOK grumbles something about dictators and gets to work. Kang then turns to Scott and Hope.
What are you waiting for?
Scott faces Kang. Will Cassie be okay up here?
She'll be perfectly safe,
Kang promises.
I'll keep MODOK in check.
Alright. Scott looks at Hope and she nods. The two of them crash through the window, shrinking and flying down to the pit.
You could have used the door!
Kang yells after them. As Hope is flying down with Scott on her back, Hope asks, what does Kang need this device for? I don't know, Scott lies, but he said that if we get it, he can take us home with it. Then let's get this device, Hope says. Scott and Hope reach the ground and they enter a strange energy field. What was that? Scott asks. Then, a copy of Scott appears and yells, I know exactly what that was. Hope looks shocked, when suddenly, copies of Hope begin to appear. Scott reaches for his earpiece. What's going on? He asks. You've entered a probability storm, MODOK explains. Every choice you're presented with will create copies of you, representing the choices you didn't make. Within seconds, Scott and Hope are surrounded by hundreds of themselves. Okay, Scott tries to calm himself down. We just need to find the device and get out of here. Another Scott pops up. You know what? The copy says, I don't want to find the device. Other copies of Scott and Hope join in. Me neither, they all say. Let's stop them from getting the device, one of the Scott copies says. Then another Scott copy whispers, I don't want to stop them. A Hope copy shoots the passive Scott copy down. You're weak, the Hope copy says. Let's get him! Do I really sound like that? The real Hope asks. When you get angry, it comes out a little, Scott replies. The Hope copies all charge up their sting blasts. We have to go, Hope says. Now! As Scott and Hope run, more copies pop up. No, don't go, stay here! MODOK! Scott yells into his earpiece. How do we get rid of the probability storm? You don't, MODOK says. It'll pass by in a few minutes. Scott looks at the sea of copies that want to stop him and Hope from finding the device. So we have to hold these guys off until the probability storm goes away? I don't know if we can hold them all off for a few minutes, Hope worries. We'll have to try, Scott says. And with that, he and Hope charge at their copies. Cassie, from within the computer room, hears Scott and Hope fighting their copies through the comms. I need you to get me down there, Cassie says. They need my help.
Cassie,
Kang says.
If you were to go down there, it would just make the odds even worse for your parents. Your father was right. It's best if you stay here.
Cassie grumbles and begins to pace around the room, getting more and more upset as she hears Scott and Hope through the comms. Cut back to Scott and Hope, who are getting overwhelmed by the vast amount of copies. You were right, there's too many of them, Scott yells. Don't worry, I have a plan, Hope shouts back. Suddenly, one of her copies grows to giant size. And there goes my plan. The giant Hope copy lifts up her foot to step on the real Scott and Hope, but they manage to get out of the way. The giant Hope crushes dozens of copies. You know, that just gave me an idea, Scott says. Hope, you keep your giant copy distracted while I get the other copies ready. Hope realizes Scott's plan and nods. She then turns back and says, Isn't that kind of dark? leading yourself to the slaughter? If it makes you feel any better, I'm leading you to the slaughter as well, Scott replies. Hope rolls her eyes and flies up to the giant copy's eye level, followed by other copies of her. The giant Hope tries to swat the real Hope, but the real Hope and all her copies dodge the attack, except for one, which falls to the floor. Meanwhile, Scott is getting all of the copies on the ground to chase after him. Hope, now! Scott yells. The real Hope shoots her giant copy with her sting blast, causing her to stumble and crush the large group of copies Scott lured into place. Hey, be careful not to crush me, the real Scott shouts. I'm sorry, you look the same as all the other Scotts, Hope shouts back. You can't tell apart your own husband? You're all my husband! Aw, is this your first fight as a married couple? MODOK asks through the comms. Not now, MODOK! Scott and Hope say in unison. Well, I thought you should know that the probability storm is almost past, MODOK says. It'll be completely gone in about a minute. I don't think I can hold her off for another minute, Hope yells as she dodges another swat from her giant copy. I'll help, Scott says. Wait, no, Hope shouts, but it's too late. Scott grows to giant size, and one of his copies, copies him. Oh yeah, Scott says. I forgot about that. Scott and his giant copy grapple with each other, crashing to the floor and crushing hundreds of copies. After a quick tussle, the real Scott manages to pin his giant copy to the ground. Scott knocks down his giant copy and rushes to help Hope. Scott tackles the giant Hope copy to the ground, and the two begin to wrestle on the floor. But it's clear that Hope is a better fighter than Scott is. She pins Scott down and raises her fist, when she suddenly vanishes. Scott and Hope look around and see that all of their copies are gone. Congrats, MODOK says. You survived the probability storm. Now get the device and get out before you get trapped in another one. Speaking of, Scott says, where is this device? Hope taps Scott on the shoulder and points into the air. The device, blown up to hundreds of times its normal size, is floating above them. It's huge, Scott says. How are we going to take this to Kang? Hope asks.
You'll have to shrink it back down to its normal size, about the size of a cell phone,
Kang instructs them. Scott and Hope take out their shrinking discs and throw them at the device until it returns to normal size. We got it, Scott says. Bring the device back up, MODOK tells them. Scott and Hope shrink and fly out of the pit. While Scott and Hope are flying back to Kang, Scott's earpiece starts to glitch out. He then hears Janet's voice.
Scott, are you there?
Janet? Scott exclaims. Mom? Hope asks.
Scott, where are you? Is Hope okay?
Janet demands. Hope's fine, Scott says. Did you know that there were people in the quantum realm?
Yes, I did.
Janet answers quickly.
Scott, did you meet someone by the name of Kang?
Yeah, Scott says. How do you know Kang? Then it clicks in Scott's mind.
So they compromised the device.
You're who he was talking about.
Scott, listen to me. Whatever he says, you cannot trust Kang.
All of a sudden, the comm cuts off. Janet? Scott asks. Scott, what happened? Hope asks. Kang knew Janet from when she was in the quantum realm, Scott says. She's the one who compromised the device. That's why it was so big, Hope realizes. Should we still give the device to Kang? If he knows we're onto him, he might hurt Cassie, Scott points out. But Mom stopped him from getting the device for a reason, Hope rebuts. If we give it to Kang, who knows what he can do with it? Scott is silent for a second. I do, he says. Huh? I know what he can do with it. Hope stops flying, and the two of them sit down in a crevice in the side of the pit. What do you mean? Scott sighs. When we first met Kang, he froze time for everyone except me and him. He said that he knew I was trapped in time before, and he said that if I get him this device, he'll make it so that I was there for Cassie during the 5 years I was gone. Hope is stunned silent. It's just that he reminded me of how much time I missed with Cassie, and she's almost an adult now. Between prison and being trapped in the quantum realm, I missed most of my daughter's life. But Scott, would you really be willing to jeopardize all of time to spend more time with your daughter? After a second, Scott nods. I would. Cassie is everything to me. Hope is shocked. I can't believe you, Scott. I know what I did isn't right, but for Cassie, I'd do it all over again. But is this what Cassie would want? Hope asks. Scott hangs his head. I'm not sure. Hope sighs. How's this? We'll go back to Kang, get Cassie, and figure out what to do from there. Scott looks at Hope. Okay. Scott and Hope jump out of the crevice and continue flying up to Kang. When Scott and Hope reach Kang's computer room, the first thing they notice is that Cassie is chained to the wall, struggling to get out. Scott runs over to his daughter. Cassie, are you okay? He asks. I'm fine, just stuck, Cassie grunts. Scott turns to Kang. Why is my daughter chained to the wall? He demands.
Because you broke our deal, Kang says. I know about the conversation you had with Janet.
What? How? Are you a mind reader?
You left your communicators on,
Kang replies. Oh, Scott says. MODOK laughs. Ha! Rookie mistake, Scott! But you promised that Cassie would be safe, Scott shouts.
And she was, until you went against the terms of our agreement, Kang says. And since you didn't keep up your end, I no longer have to either.
I did keep up my end, Scott says as he shows the device to Kang. Kang holds out his hand, and the device floats towards him.
Thank you for your service, Ant-Man, Kang says. MODOK, kill them.
With pleasure, MODOK replies. We had a deal, Kang, Scott shouts.
Your screams fall on deaf ears,
Kang says back.
I've killed hundreds of Ant-Men. You are nothing.
Don't insult my father, Cassie yells from within her chains. Kang turns to Cassie.
Now that I think about it, you'd be an even better hero than he is, given that your powers aren't reliant on technology.
Kang laughs to himself.
Perhaps you can replace your useless father in the Avengers.
My father is not useless, Cassie screams. Suddenly, she begins to grow. Her chains snap off of her as she stalks toward Kang, still growing. Scott and Hope look on in shock as Cassie, now the height of the ceiling, slams her fist down on Kang, crushing him. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Cassie wouldn't do that, she's 16. And to you, naysayers, I'd like to remind you of the time when Cassie socked Dr. Doom, who is made even more powerful by a Scarlet Witch, in the face. A stunt like this is definitely within her wheelhouse. Now, back to the story. Cassie lifts up her hand and sees that the Kang she crushed was merely an android. Suddenly, another Kang appears out of thin air and shoots Cassie with an energy blast. Cassie goes flying and slams into the back wall, going unconscious and shrinking back to normal size.
I'll admit,
Kang says.
I did not expect that.
Then, Kang is thrown into the air and falls to the ground. An old-fashioned Ant-Man suit grows to normal size. The man takes off his helmet to reveal...
Get away from my granddaughter,
Hank says. Hank? Scott says. Next to Hank, Janet grows to normal as well, wearing an old Wasp suit. Scott, do you still have the portal generator? Janet asks. No, the robot Kang took it. Wait, did you say portal generator? Scott says. Janet nods. The portal generator allows Kang to travel the multiverse. Because the quantum realm is outside of time and space, that portal generator is his only way to get out. Which also means it's our only way to get out, Hope finishes. Scott looks down at the remains of the robot Kang and sees the portal generator is gone.
I believe you're looking for this,
The real Kang says, holding the portal generator in his hand. Cassie then wakes up. What happened? Cassie! Scott rushes to his daughter to make sure she's okay. Meanwhile, Kang creates a portal with the portal generator. Before walking through, he turns to MODOK.
You have a job to do,
he says. I will do as I was programmed, MODOK says, as a mechanized organism designed only for killing. You know, the new acronym fits better, Scott jokes.
Scott,
Hank says.
Take Hope and Cassie and go after Kang.
We'll keep this guy busy, Janet adds, pointing to MODOK. MODOK laughs. Alright, old-timers, let's go! Old-timers, Janet says. She shrinks down and kicks MODOK back. Hank grows to giant size.
Go before the portal closes!
Cassie goes first, jumping through the portal as it begins to close. Hope follows Cassie, shrinking to ensure that she makes it through the portal. Scott readies himself and thinks back to the training he did when he first became Ant-Man. Scott runs at the portal and shrinks through it, like he did with the keyhole in the first movie. You may have saved him this time, Hank, MODOK says, but I'll get my chance. I'm going to kill Scott and prove that I'm the true successor to Hank Pym.
You know what I like most about Scott, Darren?
Hank says.
He doesn't talk as much.
Hank and Janet face off against MODOK. And there we go! Thank you all for watching. I'm sorry this came out later than I intended. Who would have guessed that giving yourself the same amount of time to do double the amount of work means you might not get it done in time? I can't guarantee that part 3 comes out next week, but I will try my best. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Until then, see ya!